We are continuing our months-long saga doing conference previews for all 32 conferences in college basketball. My co-host Isaac Shade and I led off with the ACC on Tuesday's episode. Isaac talked about the Horizon League on Wednesday's episode, and here for Thursday's show, Leaf and I are going to break down the Big Sky Conference, starting with the biggest storylines. Then we're going to talk about our predictions for who's going to win, some dark horse teams, and then close it out with some award predictions for the Big Sky. And for biggest storylines, Leaf, it always is kind of the same with these mid-major conferences. A lot of the times it's that a lot of players left. A lot of players transfer up. That's the kind of the common thing we're seeing in college basketball these days. And you look at the list of players leaving the Big Sky Conference. Dalton Connect goes over to Tennessee. He's going to be a nice piece over there. Isaac Jones goes from Idaho to Washington State. Steele Venters just travels 30 miles up I-90 to go from Eastern Washington to Gonzaga. Raekwon Battle is going to be a big piece at West Virginia after leaving Montana State. Jalen Cohn, we talked about him recently on the show, as well as one of the best newcomers into the Pac-12 conference coming over from Northern Arizona. And Leaf, it feels like this is just kind of the new norm for these mid-major conferences. And the Big Sky is certainly not a premier college basketball conference, but it kind of is a bummer to see like really talented players who aren't sticking around with these teams anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's going to happen with the transfer portal. There's nothing we can do about it at this point. I love a really cohesive unit that comes in as a scrappy March Madness underdog, and those who really know college basketball know, hey, that team's played together for 3-4 years, and maybe they do have a chance as a 13 seed to beat the 4 because their game style is really well. It's well grooved. They've done everything together. Now it's reliant. A lot of these teams are reliant on one or two of the best players. And you look at the top teams of the conference, like Montana State's made back-to-back NCAA tournaments. Now they got absolutely blasted by Texas Tech, who was extremely physical, but that's a team that athletically couldn't match up. Montana State had a better matchup against Kansas State, who made the Elite Eight.
Yeah, that was a close game too.
And it was a 9-point game at the end, but it was, within that range the whole time. It wasn't like a 9-point backdoor cover.
Right.
And so my point of that is they lost their top 4 players probably and their coach. And so now you look at like the demise of cohesive teams in mid majors. And this is not just a Big Sky thing. This is national, as big as like even the Atlantic 10 has a max exodus. And that's a team that typically puts in 2 or 3 teams into the tournament. To me, I think that we're just going to have to live with it as college basketball fans, and we're going to enjoy, those top talents of these mid majors going to the best teams. But I don't think we can change it.
No, I don't think so either. And one way that can kind of recuperate some of this is we also see the opposite. And I hate this phrase, but I'm going to use it as transfer down. Players who transfer from high majors or even from better mid-major conferences, they transfer down to the Big Sky Conference and can, get more playing time and find a bigger role. And there's certainly some players who may fit that mold here. KJ Allen's a guy who didn't play much at Texas Tech. He goes to Portland State. Definitely an opportunity for him to step into a bigger role. Tyler Lindhart didn't play much at Washington. He goes to Idaho. Like those are the kind of guys that could potentially step into those bigger roles. And we've even seen guys, Raekwon Battle as an example. He started at Washington, transferred to Montana State, scored 18 a game, transferred to West Virginia. Like we see guys starting to make that trek as well. And while that's not fun in terms of continuity for conferences like the Big Sky, it does at least allow them to kind of see these guys blossom into the best versions of themselves and then kind of move on from there. And you touched on coaching changes, and that was what I wanted to hit next. There's two coaching changes in the Big Sky. The most notable one is, of course, Montana State having to replace Danny Sprinkle. They bring in Matt Logie. Sprinkle was the guy who led them to back-to-back NCAA tournaments, like you said. Big Sky Coach of the Year in the 21-22 season, went 81-43 in 4 seasons with the Bobcats. Really elevated that Montana State program. And now he goes over to Utah State, a program that obviously needed to make a coaching change there. And he brought Darius Brown and Great Asobar over with him, 2 of the best players from that Montana State team. So I think it'll be good news for Utah State. And I'm excited about Montana State's new coach here too as well, Logie. He went 82-23 in 4 years at Point Loma, a D2 school down in San Diego. And again, always, interested to see how guys do when they move up a level. But Logie was a guy who was at Whitworth in Spokane, a D3 school, went 194-35, which is just staggering. He does that for I think 6 or 7 years there, goes to Point Loma and basically puts up the same win percentage. Is he going to come in and win 82% of his games at Montana State? Probably not, but there's a track record of tremendous success, a career 82.6% winning rate in his time at Whitworth and Point Loma. So I'm excited about what he brings to Montana State. And then over at Idaho, they brought in a new coach as well. And it wasn't because their other coach got a better job. It was because they fired him, because Idaho's been one of the worst teams in Division I college basketball for a while. They went 1-21 in that 2020-21 season. They weren't a whole lot better last year. They fire Zach Klaus. He takes the job at Western Colorado at the D2 level, and they bring over Alex Pribble, who is the associate head coach at Seattle U. I've said this on this podcast. I am an alum from Seattle U as well as Gonzaga. I follow Seattle U basketball closely. Pribble is a tough loss for Seattle U. Fantastic coach, helped lead Seattle U to back-to-back 20-win seasons. He was a former head coach at St. Martin's, a D2 school in Washington, and I think is going to do a nice job at Idaho. It's going to be a multi-year rebuild for the Vandals, but I'm excited about that. So I think losing Sprinkle's tough for the Big Sky, but I think these two schools brought in some solid coaches to help kind of elevate the conference a little bit.
Yeah, coaching, the carousel's interesting now because it's basically if one guy exceeds expectations by enough at a lower level, they're going to get promoted. But that even goes further. And like in the case of Utah State, obviously VCU's coach goes to Penn State, then Utah State's coach Odom goes to VCU. VCU recruits all those Utah State guys. Utah State's guys go to VCU, and now you hire Sprinkle, and Montana State's guys go to Utah State. So now that opens up the vacancy. So that's the whole thing. This is going to happen time and time again. What I expect to happen is eventually Montana State's going to have a way to replenish their program, but it's not a large enough commodity in terms of like basketball players know, hey, they made 2 straight NCAA tournaments, but this guy's not here. But I think eventually they'll be able to be kind of a power in the Big Sky because I think that their basketball style was conducive to winning, and it showed that a lot of their players are now getting chances at someone like West Virginia. And when he committed, I think this is before the Huggins scandal, and that was for a legend of the basketball game with Bob Huggins. So if you can go here and succeed, this is going to happen. But I don't want to jump the gun, but I do think I'm going to take a team that hasn't had as much turnover. I think the team to beat to me is in Weber State in Ogden, Utah. I think they've got the best player. I also think that they've got a good supporting cast, and there hasn't been much turnover whatsoever. And I know Randy Ray, longtime coach here, I actually played basketball growing up with his son, is no longer the coach, but it's a well indebted program. Like they know how to play basketball. Obviously, Damian Lillard, a notable alumni, but they've had other guys go to the NBA. And I met Dillon Jones at the NBA Combine, and you can just see the intensity. And I think relative to NBA draft prospects, he didn't stand out, but relative to some of the college competition, not just Big Sky, but in just general, he's one of the better players in the country. And so I always lean to a better player with a cohesive unit without much turnover.
Yeah, Weber State is a fantastic. I listed them as a dark horse, but I'm not sure they're actually a dark horse. I think Montana State and Eastern Washington were clearly the two best teams in the conference, but Weber State was right behind them. Eastern loses Steele Venters, their leading scorer. They also lose Angelo Allegri, who was their second leading scorer, 13.5 points per game. They do add a guy I like in Jake Kyman, who didn't do much at Wyoming. He also didn't do much at UCLA in the 3 years before that, but he hasn't gotten very many opportunities. If he gets a big role at Eastern, I could see him kind of showcasing why he was such a highly regarded prospect coming into college. Montana State, we kind of talked about already. They lost their 4 leading scorers. They added a few guys who I think could be solid for them. I like Chika Nduka, who comes over from the University of Portland. But again, he's not a guy who's going to move the needle that much. So to me, Eastern takes a hit. Montana State takes a hit. Meanwhile, Weber State has, in my mind, far and away the best player in the conference. Again, a guy who would be the best player in a lot of college basketball conferences would be a player who could play on most programs in the country, in Dillon Jones. Fantastic talent. Again, they also get back one of their key starters last year in Steven Verplanken, who averaged 13 points per game. KJ Cunningham comes back. as well. And so I think they're kind of the dark horse-ish, maybe the favorite coming into the season, even though they were not in the top 2 last year. I also have Portland State as a potential favorite, a dark horse, and that's more of a shot in the dark pick here. They went 6-11 in the conference last year, and they lost their leading scorer, Cameron Parker, who averaged 19 per game, but they keep basically everybody else. They're an old team. They're a veteran team. I talked a little bit about the transfer coming in, KJ Allen, who played 45 games at Texas Tech, only scored 2 points per game, but in a bigger role, maybe he could be a guy who kind of thrives. And they also added a big man from South Carolina, Trayvon Minot, who only played 7 minutes per game in 29 games at South Carolina. So not a big role player, but a 6'9" player who I think could step into a role. So is Portland State going to go from middle of the pack to the top? No, maybe not, but I think they're a team that could make some noise in that conference.
Yeah, I think Portland State's an interesting one because you see them exposed to good teams. Like last year, they played in the PK 85.
Yeah, played Gonzaga last year, yeah.
And so you see them. I wouldn't say they competed in terms of like had a chance to win, but they didn't look bad.
No, they played hard.
Yeah, and so I always like that but at a certain point, in conference play, everyone's going to. So I have a little bit less of like because I've seen them more against better competition. I favor them a little less than you, but I don't dislike that call. I think, like I said, Weber State to me has the most like set in piece ability. I'd be curious about KJ Allen because, like I said, Texas Tech has recruited well. That's a talented player. And then you've got a couple new players going through. Like you've got Trayvon Minot, like you mentioned, and Carson Basham at NAU. I don't know if NAU I'd put in the top competitors of this list, but I know that they've got more players that are staying and they have belief, and they made a little bit of a Cinderella run last year in the Big Sky Conference tournament. Came up a bit short, but I mean, sometimes you believe in that type of momentum going forward, especially in a conference when your team has most of their players coming back. You add a good player in Basham who may well be the newcomer of the year, and I mean Liam Lloyd is a solid player, and they lose Jalen Cohn is my one concern, but I also think that if you lose that shooter, you may have more opportunities for other players to play like more standardized roles. So that would be a team I'm a little higher on than the consensus.
Shout out Gary Bell, former Gonzaga player and now an assistant coach over at Northern Arizona. Leaf, I want to go through our award predictions here, rapid fire, really quickly. I'll start with Player of the Year. It's Dillon Jones. There's almost no debate in my mind. A guy who averaged a double-double last year is going to have even more of an opportunity to explode in this next season at Weber State. What about you?
Yeah, I got to go Dillon Jones. Like I mentioned, he was at the combine and he was yapping with Amari Bailey and he's a competitor. I met him. He's a really nice guy. And so I think he's going to use the motivation of not performing as well as he would have liked at the combine to his advantage and really kind of take the Big Sky by storm.
You mentioned my newcomer of the year, which is Carson Basham, a guy who averaged 7.5 points and 4 boards at Pepperdine last year. 6'10" centers just don't come into the Big Sky all that often. He's going to be one of the biggest players in the league. I think there's more of an opportunity for him to score, especially with Jalen Cohn out the door. Like you said, there's a chance that he's going to be a pretty solid rim protector as well. And I think all that kind of leads to him being potentially the best new guy joining that conference.
Yeah, he's who I'd lean. The big name would be Jake Kyman, but I think Jake Kyman's a big name because he attended UCLA, not because of what he did at UCLA or at Wyoming. So I agree with you. I was going to try to be different, but I think your point of you don't see 6'10" and athletic join the Big Sky as often. And Jake Kyman fits the mold more often of a guy who can shoot and he's scrappy and he's a solid athlete, but it's just one of them to me is more different than the rest. And I'm going to take my chances that he develops his game as he matures as well.
Yeah. Coach of the year, I'm going with Eric Duft at Weber State. Again, we talked about them being the team that might make the leap here. And if they go from third to first or even second or just improve on that, and Jones has that monster season, I think there's a real chance there. It's hard to ignore what David Riley has done at Eastern Washington, but I think that team takes a step back, which probably clears the way for Duft to be the coach of the year from Weber State.
Yeah, I think Duft is the call. But I will say I think the job that Matt Logie has is more difficult.
Yeah.
And so if they're both like 1 and 2, I would say Logie's done the better job. It's just that he's got a kind of a tough task to exceed expectations considering
Yeah.
the last 2 years they made the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I just wanted to show that
Mhm.
that train of logic as well, because
Mhm.
I didn't know about the win percentage being the same. I did
Yeah.
know where he came from, but I
Mhm.
didn't know about at all levels his win
Yeah.
possession is just astronomical, quite
Yeah.
frankly.
Defensive player of the year. I was leaning between two guys who have already picked up awards in here between Basham and Jones. I'm going to go with Dillon Jones. He's such a tenacious rebounder. He's a high level athlete, one of the best, if not the best athlete in the conference. And I think he's going to put together enough production from just in terms of his on ball defense, getting some blocks, getting some steals, cleaning up on the glass. And I think that's enough for him to take home that award as well as player of the year.
I can't disagree, considering I saw him clapping and yapping with Amari Bailey, and then on the other end it would be like, okay, who's next? And
Mhm.
so considering that's what he was used to this summer,
Mhm.
I'm going to imagine he's going to be frustrated that he didn't put forth a better showing offensively and maybe take it out defensively on some of these players. So I'm with you. I wish I could be more of a contrarian, but I kind of agree on these ones.
Yeah. Well, Leif, this was fun. Thank you so much for jumping on the show to talk Big Sky Conference. We're going to be doing a whole heck of a lot more of these, so I'm excited to get a chance to hear your expertise on some of these other smaller conferences going forward.
Absolutely.
Well, that is going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those of you checking us out on YouTube. Go hit that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. We are over 1,400 subscribers, so less than 100 away from our goal of getting to 1,500 before the season starts. I think we can get there well before the season starts, but we could use your help. So go to youtube.com, search Locked On College Basketball, hit that big subscribe button. We're also going to break out all of these conference previews into a playlist. So if you want to listen to them all on YouTube, go ahead and do that. Thanks again so much for listening. We'll talk to you very soon. And until next time, peace out.